Hello, this is Jude Wolf, and this is a podcast for the Assistive Technology class, Ed 4207. This module has been created to clarify some misconceptions as seen in your Universal Design for Learning reading lesson plan. As special education teachers, we work to ensure that we have enough evidence and data to ensure that our students are really making progress. Therefore, it is critical that your understanding of assessment for learning and of learning is crystal clear. So the objectives for this module is as follows. Need to make sure that we clarify the misconceptions. And after listening to this podcast, you will need to provide more specific examples of formative versus summative assessments in the assigned UDL lesson plan for writing and math. Before going any further, please make sure you download the material or Chapter 1 Formative Assessment and Assessment for Learning, which has been uploaded in the handout section under Session 7 online module March 23. So you should go and get that and make sure that you have that with you. So as you think about formative assessments, think of the continuum of technology, both from low technology to high technology. And what would these formative assessments through? How do assessments usually look like in a classroom? And what does assessment look like to you? More importantly, when students act on assessment information, what do they need to do? What are you having them do when you're creating formative assessments? So as your teaching practice grows, think of formative assessments not just as an instrument or event. Think of formative assessment, as a collection of practices that give you the following information. What is the action that improves learning, and how do you use that information to adjust your teaching and your students' learning? In contrast, summative assessments are not teachable moments for students. Rather, during summative assessments, you will be making a judgment about your students' competence or about program effectiveness. So during summative assessments, these really are not teaching times, or it's not the time for you to adjust teaching per se. So in the next slide, we'll give you examples of formative and summative assessments. On page figure 1.3, there's several other examples of formative and summative assessments. Have a look at that. And if you have any further questions, we can talk about that next Monday at our meeting. If you answered summative, and formative, you're correct. At this point, what I'd like you to do is look at page 8 of the handout, and that lists several examples of formative and summative assessments. If you have further questions, we can talk about it on Monday when we meet. So the next part is, how do you communicate the intended learning of a lesson, activity, task, unit, or project to your students? And when does this occur? So what I should see in your lesson plans are areas that tell me the learning goals scattered and strategically placed in during direct instruction, guided instruction, independent instruction, and even in the extended lessons. After reading the handout of the Chapter 1 handout, it should start to look clear for you that assessment for learning is quite different from assessment of learning. Assessment for learning is the formative assessment process that really spirals through the entire lesson plan. As you implement your plan, your formative assessments should give you more understanding of how your students are responding to your instruction, that you can make changes to your lessons the next day. Assessment of learning then is the summative assessment in which you will then judge how well your students comprehended your lesson or the instruction. It is that at the point where you are judging now your student's competency and or judging the effectiveness of the program teaching. So assessments inform your instruction and your teaching. When your formative assessment practices are solid, they answer the following questions to help you meet your student learning needs. As you'll see, these questions should not look very strange or new to you. These are the questions that we've talked about in the cycle of universal design for learning. As you contemplate on the following questions, then, think about where, when, and how you would get the answer to these questions using your lesson plan and as you plan for your lesson. Now, this slide is essentially the graphic organizer to form a comprehensive and effective formative assessment cycle. There are 3 questions that you need to ask when you are planning formative assessment practices. The 3 questions are: where am I going? Where am I now? And how do I close the gap? There are 2 strategies for where am I going. You essentially need to have a learning goal, an understandable vision of your learning target. That's strategy 1. If this is clear, your students' motivation and achievement will increase because what they need to learn and what they have to do are guided by your clear learning targets. Strategy 2 then tells the kids that with the examples and models of strong and weak work, they can then create for themselves and refine their own understanding of how they need to show you that they understand and know how to complete the learning goal. So the next question, where am I now, tells the student that what their strengths are, what do they need to work on, where do they go wrong, what they can do about it. And essentially that is giving them regular descriptive feedback. Strategy 4 tells your students how to self-assess and set goals. Now, goal setting is another lesson in and of itself, but when done correctly, your students become more self-regulated. And with your feedback, then they get to know what their strengths are and weaknesses are. Now, how do you close a gap in their learning? Strategy 5 says that you need to design lessons to focus on that gap, that learning target, so that gap becomes now your new learning goal. And assess them on the aspect or teach them on that aspect of quality at one point during class. With your assessment results, then you can adjust the instruction to target that need. You narrow the focus of a lesson and help your students master that specific lesson that they had difficulty with. Strategy 6 also tells you to teach your students to focus on specific revisions. So you're telling them you created a lesson that addressed the gap. Now you're having students act on and show you that they understood that specific lesson on that gap. You're asking your students to focus on certain areas, to relearn it, and to reconfigure their understanding. Lastly, you need to teach your students how to self-reflect, how to keep track, and share learning. Research, when students do this, look back at their learning, explain it to others, their retention tends to be longer. So how do you apply this information? Well, if you're writing UDL lesson plans, please focus on your formative and summative assessment exercises or activities. Provide examples of each that link directly to your chosen lesson. It was really difficult to see the point, and in correcting or giving you feedback on your reading UDL lesson plans, I saw that there were some misconceptions about formative and summative assessments, and I've given you some comments on your paper, in which you'll get back on Monday. I look forward to seeing exciting ideas So thank you for listening, and please email me if you have any questions.